Hi, I'm Debbie Harbeck, and I'm a certified life coach working with women in midlife and through the menopause transition. So each week, I'll be sharing the latest information, inspiration, and generate some momentum so you can move forward and feel more in control of your changing midlife body and your life. Let's go. Hi, and welcome to the very first episode of the Midlife Momentum Podcast. So I've been wanting to start this podcast for a few years now, and I finally made the commitment and gathered the courage to get it done. So yay, I'm here. If you've been following me through the years, you may already be familiar with my work through my blog or my coaching or my classes. But for those of you that are new to me, I just want to take a moment to introduce myself. So I'm Debbie Harbeck, and I'm a life coach for women in midlife, and specifically those of us who are adjusting to this transition through perimenopause and menopause. Now, from the outset, from this very first podcast, I want to just take this time to clarify what I mean by midlife and perimenopause and menopause and even postmenopause. So since midlife is a very big part of the title of this podcast, I'm going to start there. So when I check the Googles, midlife is usually defined as being between the ages of 40 and 60 or 65. Now, I think midlife probably goes on a little longer than that these days because we are living longer and healthier lives. So you might be in your 70s and still consider yourself in midlife, which I think is perfectly acceptable. But even if it's not defined by age, there are certain experiences that you might associate with midlife. So the first one I think of is that you feel a desire for a change in your job or your career, in a relationship. You want more adventure. So at this point in life, we start to question a lot of things. So you may know what I mean. I was actually just 1 month shy of my 40th birthday when I left my career in aerospace as an aerospace engineer to start working in this world of coaching. On the physical side, you may be in midlife if your eyesight isn't as sharp. So maybe you notice, like me, that you're holding things a little further away so you can read that small print in those labels. Or how about noticing that you're just a little bit more sore in the morning, more achy, your joints are a little sore. That's something that can start happening. I'm experiencing it too. Probably the last 5 to 10 years it's been going on. And maybe you're in midlife when you notice you're concerned about looking older. So again, probably for me, 5 to 10 years, I got a lot more interested in skincare, in makeup, and because I started noticing the wrinkles and the age spots, and they started to concern me. So I started to be much more interested in all things about my face and skin. Maybe you've also noticed that you have some weight gain that's harder to lose, especially around the middle. Also a part of midlife and something I'm definitely going to address in this podcast. And maybe you've noticed something more positive. Like for me, for instance, I notice I don't care as much what other people think, and I'm pretty sure that that's a common trait in midlife. We start to care less about what others think. We have a lot more freedom when that happens. And probably I wouldn't have started this podcast before midlife, and I couldn't have because I didn't have the courage to do it. But now at 50, here I am starting my podcast. And maybe you've also noticed a positive thing about being a little bit more health conscious. Maybe you're a lot more aware about what you're eating, or that you're exercising, or you want to exercise more, and that you want to prevent injury or illness, and you just want to live a healthier life as you age. So this could be a very positive change, and that's obviously something I'll also talk about a lot on this podcast. Now, those are just a few signs, but they do definitely overlap with perimenopause and menopause in women. So if you're not familiar with these terms, perimenopause, menopause, or postmenopause, I just want to let you in on what they mean and clarify that. So I'm going to start with menopause itself. Before I really dive in, I just want to make it clear that menopause It's a natural part of life for women. It's not a condition, it's not a disease, and we shouldn't treat it that way. It can be uncomfortable, yeah, for sure. And you may choose to take hormone therapy or require other medications to deal with certain symptoms. But as women, we all go through menopause if we're lucky. And I just want to normalize it. So there you go. It's normal. We're going through it. So starting with menopause, like I said, it happens. It's like a gateway. It's a threshold. It happens when you go a full 12 months without a menstrual cycle. After that 12 months is done, you are considered to be in postmenopause. But we usually use those terms interchangeably. So once we pass that gateway, we consider ourselves to be in menopause. But really, menopause is just that gate. So once you've done that, you're in menopause. And menopause or postmenopause happens when we're around 51. Let's say around in North America, that's about the average age of women who go through that menopause gate. Now, perimenopause isn't as clear cut as menopause. It's a time of transition. So it's not an event. It doesn't have a really clear definition either. So perimenopause can generally last anywhere from 5 to 15 years, with 45 being about the average age where things begin to change. And of course, perimenopause is a normal life transition for women, just like puberty, just like pregnancy. It's a transition. So hormonally, what perimenopause means is when your estrogen and your progesterone, those female hormones in your ovaries, they start to become unstable. So sometimes they'll spike up, sometimes they'll drop, they can cause all kinds of discomforts. So what are the signs of perimenopause? How will you know you're there? Well, it's different for everyone, but general things, like the first one being that your cycle becomes a little or maybe even a lot irregular, meaning you can have shorter or longer cycles from time to time. Another sign is that fat that I talked about around the middle. And honestly, that's what woke me up to the fact I was probably in perimenopause. My cycle hadn't changed yet, but I was noticing my pants were a little tighter, and yet I hadn't changed the way I was eating. I hadn't changed my exercise. So definitely something was going on, and that clued me in that, perimenopause. And oddly enough, before that point, I had never heard the term perimenopause. I was 45 and never heard that term before. Maybe you're like me. So perimenopause, something to be aware of, is actually when the symptoms happen, not in menopause. They do continue into menopause, but perimenopause is where they start. So other signs of perimenopause can include hot flushes or flashes, whatever term you use, joint pain, migraines, heavier periods, bloating, heart palpitations, mood swings, or really just negative emotions like anger and irritation. UTIs are more common, meaning like bladder infections. You might have trouble sleeping or falling asleep. And I could go on, there's more things, but those are some really common ones. Now, I just want to say that although these issues usually begin in perimenopause, as I was mentioning before, they don't just stop because you transition through menopause. You'll continue probably having discomforts for a few years into menopause as well. So just to be clear on that. Now, I want to share my experience so far, even though everybody's experience is different. But for me so far, I'm 50 and I'm still in perimenopause. In the last few years, I've experienced irregular cycles, both shorter and longer. I've had heart palpitations, especially during the night if I have alcohol the evening before. I have joint pain and body aches, especially in the morning. And I've also had a bout with heartburn, which I suspect was linked to perimenopause because I was under a lot of stress at the time. And just an aside here, but stress can significantly affect your perimenopause experience. So although I've just told you what I've experienced so far, it's not an indication of what you will be or maybe you are going through right now. Some women don't really have any issues at all. Perimenopause is a breeze. And then there are others who suffer tremendously. And true to that, I've had friends who didn't really notice any change until their period slowed and they found themselves in menopause. And then I've had other friends and clients who have had severe bleeding, fibroids, migraines, night sweats where their sheets are drenched, and just other issues. You just don't know how it will go. But of course, there are some lifestyle choices that can impact your experience. Like for me, I know alcohol negatively impacts me right now. So I'm much more careful about what and when I drink. And I know that I can't tolerate fried foods like I used to. And I know that my sleep has changed, and I rarely sleep through the night. I usually wake up once or twice during the night. And you may notice these changes, maybe certain foods or drinks or activities or even work that's affecting you differently than before. So what I suggest is making a note of them and notice if you take those things away, do you feel better? So that's something to really be aware of. Finally, I've talked mostly about the physical signs in your body, but of course, how you're feeling physically or emotionally can have an effect on other parts of your life. So many women in perimenopause are not only going through a physical transition, a lot of us are going through emotional transitions. Some are feeling more irritable, angry, frustrated, sad, and even depressed. Depression goes up at this time of life. And we can't just brush it off as hormonal. These feelings are valid, and they should be felt and taken seriously if they're impacting your daily life. And to continue with that, whether your symptoms are physical or emotional or both, your life is likely to be impacted. You may start finding the daily grind of work and home more challenging. You may find yourself struggling to handle normal work tasks that were easy before, or feel more stressed or anxious in your work. You may find relationships more challenging. Maybe you're less patient or just more emotional with things like kids leaving the nest or parents getting sick or even a spouse retiring and being home more of the time. Nothing happens in isolation here. So whatever's happening to you is impacting everyone around you as well. So now I've shared all this information about perimenopause, but I'm not a doctor and I don't pretend to play one here on my podcast. So if you're noticing anything unusual, physically or emotionally, don't assume it's just perimenopause. Instead, make an appointment with your medical doctor, your psychologist, psychiatrist, and get yourself checked out. Although there's no blood test to confirm that you're in perimenopause, because your hormones are fluctuating, as I mentioned, they could be up, they could be down, they could be perfectly normal on the moment of that blood test. So the blood test is not an accurate measure, but your doctor will be able to assess whether you're in perimenopause based on the things you're experiencing. And if you have a doctor that knows this, and that's a whole other topic that I will get into in another episode, but make sure your doctor is well versed in menopause in women. So if you're struggling with this time of life because of perimenopause, please do not go through this alone. If you are struggling, please contact a therapist. Please get in touch with a coach like me. You shouldn't be going through this alone. And the other side of this podcast now is the momentum side. So I talked about midlife, I talked about perimenopause and menopause, but momentum is, I want to give you something to focus on to help you move forward. So I've given you information, but now what I want you to do today is that whether you're in midlife or perimenopause or menopause, is that you accept where you are right now. So accept that you're older and that your body and your life are changing. By accepting, I don't mean doing nothing and just throwing your hands up and giving up. But what I mean is that when you accept, you can see where you truly are. And then you can take next steps from there. When you live in denial, when you don't want to notice these things, you can't take any next steps. You can't make anything better. So acceptance is super important. Now, some of us will embrace midlife, so it's not a problem. Acceptance is not an issue, and that's wonderful. But so many of us are not so enthusiastic because we're experiencing physical discomforts, feelings that aren't comfortable. We're experiencing the stigma of getting older, and all of that is okay. It's okay to feel these things. It's okay to be there, and it's okay not to be embracing midlife. But we just want to get to the point where we can accept it, because at that point you can find compassion for yourself and all you're dealing with right now. And you can also do things that can support you. You can find a group of women who are sharing similar life experiences, like those in my coaching program, which will start up again in September. Or you can start writing in a journal or going for walks outside and just start taking better care of your health and fitness, both physically and mentally. I started this podcast to bring up the issues of midlife and menopause, but I also want to give you tips and ideas of how you can feel better and age healthier. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I really want to thank you for listening to this very first episode today. I'm so grateful you chose to join me. And if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to rate it on Apple or Spotify or whatever platform you're using to listen. I would really appreciate it. And I'll get back next week with a brand new, fresh episode for you. In the meantime, keep moving forward. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Midlife Momentum Podcast. If you want to learn more about working with me, come visit me at DebbieHarbeckCoaching.com. That's Debbie, I-E, Harbeck with a C, coaching.com. See you next week.